Hey everyone, Mike here. Welcome to episode 57 of the Around the Crease podcast. And I know I say this every week, but this week is a big one because we have Ty Xanders from Inside Lacrosse, and he's here to talk rankings. Last few weeks, Michael and I have been kind of talking about rankings and where to place teams and stuff like that on the previous podcast. So we thought it'd be a good idea to have someone who does it for a living onto the show. And I couldn't think of anybody I'd rather have more than Ty. I've known Ty, we both kind of started covering lacrosse around the same time, so we've kind of been in the game for about the same time. He was just starting at Inside Lacrosse when I was working at ESPN, so we used to run across each other on sidelines and whatnot. So it was fantastic to have him on this week's show. We do cover East Coast bias because I know everybody is going to be talking about that, why some teams get ranked ahead of others. We answer all those questions in this week's show. Before we jump into the interview with Ty, I'm just going to ask everybody to hit that subscribe button. If you hit that little bell, it's going to notify you every time we release new episodes. New episodes of the podcast come out every Sunday. We have also new shows on Mondays and Thursdays each week. Today, we actually want to talk more about, the philosophy of rankings and really what it goes in, because I think a lot of people, I've done it and it's not easy and it's really kind of a thankless job. So I figured, thank you for being on to kind of talk about this, because it's one of those things like you don't really need to explain yourself at this point. And so I appreciate you being on.
I'm a very defensive person, so I'll explain. I'll defend myself here. So,
okay,
I really appreciate you guys having me. Love your work and fun to be on. But
the
rankings, it's a tough thing. I think it takes a long time, and it's not exactly scientific, and definitely thankless is the best way you could possibly put it, as you did. But it's something that I've always kind of taken pride in. Yeah. It creates conversation. We know we're not going to get things right all the time. I think that is just part of athletics and prognostications and all that. It's just you're not going. You can't please everybody. You're not getting everything right. There are definitely plenty of teams. I look back at last year, I put in the top 10, and we're nowhere to be found when the season's over. So, as much as people may want to point to those teams, I think we feel pretty good about the players and teams that we rank and the position they end up in. But it's not easy.
Yeah. And I think you kind of hit it on the head, because for me, part of even doing rankings has always been especially in high school, is it creates conversation. It's one of those, people aren't necessarily talking about, St. Ignatius Prep at San Francisco. No one's really talking about them on the East Coast until they come back and beat. But then again, if you weren't ranking them, if you weren't putting their name out there somewhere, people might not know those results happen. So for me, rankings has always been it's not a science. You do the best you can, but it's also one of those, it creates conversation. It gets people talking about, even if they're not talking most civilly sometimes, at least it gets people talking about high school lacrosse when, honestly, they normally would not be. They'd be talking about their little area, and that would be it.
Yeah. It's my job to promote the game, and that's what I want to do. I think that if I can, sure, there is some creating hype in my job, but if we can get to the point where these teams want to get ranked, they want to play the best, and the two go hand in hand, and they are coming east and playing the best teams, then that's better for the game. I think that's making everyone better. I've loved when a team like St. Ignatius comes east, or, Torrey Pines got their butt kicked last year, but it was a measuring stick, and it made their team better, and they won a championship, in San Diego. So I think it's one of those things that's paramount. If you want to stack up against the best teams, you have to come east, or just play the best competition in general. I think there's no rules saying you have to come to Maryland and Philly and Connecticut to be stacked up against the very best in the country. But it helps. It definitely helps. But not every team can do that. I think that there's a limited budget and travel restrictions, like a place like Michigan. So it's very tricky, and it's easier said than done. And we know that in some senses it can be almost the haves versus the have-nots in many ways. But the game's evolving, and more teams are playing out of state, and again, I think that's only going to help the game continue its kind of upward trajectory, or what have you.
Yeah. So we'll get into a few of the questions we kind of had prepared. So so I guess one of the things I always want to know is what factors kind of go into your thinking when you're for a preseason ranking, that when you're putting those teams in order, like what are you kind of looking at when you're like, oh, this team slots into 1 to 10. I know that much. Like, what are you thinking about when you're looking at those teams?
I think, first off, it's as a disclaimer or some sense. I think that the way that we put together the preseason rankings, it's different from the in-season stuff. I think that you may see things be a little slanted towards, the East Coast teams because they stack up or they're the best teams on paper. And, I know one of the things that's always talked about is the amount of Division I commits. And, as I've gotten older, I've been doing this longer and realized, how that can almost go against you or against you because there's only one ball. So I think that it's something you have to be careful with. I respect a lot of public school programs that may not have, the pick of the litter of the talent all over. And for that reason, maybe a public school like Darien, Ward, Melville, Victor, may fall down a little bit against the Hill Academies and Salisbury's and Culvers and, of the world, not to mention the privates all over the place. So, it's tough. We definitely look at strength of schedule. But the amount of talent in your returners, just the what you have coming back, and how many big holes you have to fill. And I'll get into this, as we go on. But this year was the hardest it's ever been doing the preseason stuff because I think the class of 2018 was one of the best that I've seen. So I think that I don't look at any team in the country besides, for example, St. Anthony's. And say this is the team that didn't lose anything. Like everybody lost a lot. And I think, put Salisbury number 1, but they graduated a ton of talent. And I think they just did the best job, bringing in transfers and PGs and kind of trying to find that perfect mix. But everybody lost a ton. So I know these teams will go down these next few weeks and I'll have an egg on my face, but that's part of the job. We know that's going to happen. Undefeated seasons are just rare now. So
yeah. I know one of the things whenever I was doing the Fab 50 back when I worked at ESPN was I intentionally would put some of the New York teams kind of almost lower down in the rankings because they finished later. So it was one of those, like, I don't want to put them up in the top 10 right off the set because I know, like, at least I would put teams at the top knowing like they're probably going to lose and they will fall down, and these other teams will eventually work their way back up. So I'm trying to almost play that shell game. Like, I'm not really ranking the teams where I think they're going to end up, but I'm trying to put them in a place where, I got to be able to live with my number 1, number 2 at the end of the year. I got to look at that and be like, I'm okay with that.
Exactly. I know we do something similar. I mean, I don't, look at it and say, they're going to end later, but in many ways, I think that you play the best competition at the very end. I think that now I look at a team like Ward Melville, and as it stands, they're not playing Chaminade like they used to. They're playing in the Geico Showcase, and as it stands right now, they don't play any in-state team that is in the top 25. So how can you move up that way? Well, you do that by playing Long Island champion. You're in the Suffolk County Championship and the Long Island Championship and the downstates and the state finals. So, we know that schedules are kind of put together very differently. And we know down here in Maryland, where I am, it's kind of front loaded in a sense, but you're playing the non-conference, teams. And then you have these tests during the season that other areas just don't really have as much as Maryland and Philly, tend to have.
Yeah. So, you mentioned earlier about the number of college commits and how that can sometimes work against you when you're looking at it. Kind of explain that a little bit because, I know whenever I was doing it, it was very easy for someone to be like, they got 15 college commits on their roster. And I was always like, well, you can't, they're not all on the field at the same time. Like it's a tough measuring stick. So like, how do you guys kind of look at that kind of stuff and where does that weigh?
I think like it's one of those things. I wouldn't say it's trial and error, but in a sense, I think that I've learned that some of these teams that did have absolutely loaded rosters in 20, 21, 22 Division I commits, sometimes they were falling on their face because it's egos, it's management of that, it's management of the parents and the expectations and all of that. I think that, these kids' egos are bigger than ever before, and someone such as myself, may not help that a ton, but they've been told for the longest time how good they are, and how they're a Division I player, and they've been kind of massaged by their coaches, their club coaches for the longest time, that it's tough. It's very hard to manage, and I think that parents will freak out about the chemistry and playing time and all that, and the kids have a hard time with it, and then it can be a nightmare. I've talked to these coaches, and they said the expectations are higher and higher the more D1 commits you have, and it's so hard to kind of build that chemistry, especially to single out some teams in an area. In New England, when you're bringing in so many transfers and post-grads, it's so hard to build that chemistry with kids that have been there for the longest time and have kind of been, in their role for 2 or 3 years and think it's going to be their shot. And all of a sudden, they have this new hotshot PG come in from Canada or wherever that is taking the playing time and making things happen that way. And that's very hard to manage and come together. And it takes a special kind of coach. And there are a few of them out there, but some have faltered because it's hard to manage all that. Very long, but
yeah, I'd say, because one of my beliefs has always been like high school coach matters more than probably any other level when you go up, because college, professional, stuff like that. But so how much are you guys looking at the coach and just program history in general, because that's usually the one constant? Because you look at a Brian Kelly at Calvert Hall, like they're going to have double digits D1 commits pretty much every year for the most part, but he has a history to go on and be like he's figured out how to manage that.
Exactly, and I think the same thing with, and it's a little bit different, but even a place like Haverford, I look at Haverford, and I think I've underranked them in the past because they just always overshoot their ranking. Like they're so well coached, and John Nosetrain does an awesome job that a team like that I know is going to be in the mix, but for some reason I haven't learned yet, and they beat Boys Latin the other day pretty soundly, being up 7-0 after the first quarter and going on to win by 5. Second or third year in a row, I think. I know it's the second. I'm not sure due to lax power no longer being a thing. You don't have the old results, but right. It's a lot of programs out there that have really just always been at the top of the heap. I think when you and I were getting started in 2007, 2008, 2009, I was a senior in 2009. A lot of the teams I was writing about, I'm still writing about, and not many teams have fallen off. It really is a constant, as you said.
Yeah.
I'm still going a lot of, Gilman, Gonzaga, St. Paul's, Boys Latin, Chaminade, Del Barton, seeing a lot of that. There is some new blood, but it really is those mainstays that are always in the mix that, we always are looking at them because they figured it out. They're the best coach. They develop talent, I think, to me, at a private school especially. How good is your freshman and JV team?
Yeah.
How is your entire program? How is your feeder program? Because it's not as simple as just your head coach, and your varsity team. It goes way beyond that, and that's the fun part is looking at each program differently.
Yeah. So what does it take to be the number one team? Obviously, Salisbury has it in the preseason, but when you're looking at that, what does it take to be that number one at the end of the day?
I think a schedule that is demanding. I don't love putting a team in the top 5, top 10, and even top 25 if they're not challenging themselves. And as we mentioned, there are some restrictions, in certain areas. But to get to number one, you have to be qualified. Are you talking about in season or preseason?
Let's focus on preseason for now, because I think we've kind of covered a little bit of what it takes by the end.
Talent, I think I looked at Salisbury, and they brought in 7 or 8 transfers or post-grads I think can be game changers and really make an impact. And every year I really want a team that I look at and say, where's the weakness? And are they testing themselves? Are they playing the best competition? But I also know at the same time that I wouldn't say over-scheduling, but over-challenging yourself. There are some teams that play 6-7 teams in the top 25, and you're not going to get out of that unscathed. So, it is kind of finding. There have been times where I've said, okay, maybe see this team, being up pretty high up there, but I know they're gonna go down, at some point. But I look at the rest of the league and say, what is the likelihood of them finishing number one and going wire to wire?
Yeah.
That's what I want to see. One of the things I want to see.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Like I looked at Haverford schools. That actually in my video that's coming out tomorrow is that they play 9 teams that are ranked in your guys' preseason top 25. I mean, one of those they got Ward Melville. They drew them in that Geico showcase, and
Yep.
I talked to No Strength. They didn't know that when they were putting it together. They could have drew, Seton Hall and Lincoln Sudbury, which weren't ranked, but they got Ward Melville. So it's one of those. I'm like, 9 teams is a lot.
He'll play anybody. Yeah, Haverford
Yeah.
will play anybody, and that's what I've always liked about Nostrand is that he's not going to back down. They're not going to back down from anybody. But it's tough to get through it. You have to have the right group.
Yeah, exactly. So I know there's probably people that are probably screaming and shouting because it's the East Coast bias, and I'm not gonna lie, like it does exist. Like obviously, lacrosse is basically it was born in the East Coast, like Baltimore and Long Island. I mean, they fight it back and forth about who's got the best lacrosse, just between those two. So let's just talk about it a little bit. Like, how do you view the East Coast bias, and why do you think it exists?
Well, one, I live on the East Coast, but no, I mean, I think it is one of those things that where I would answer this question differently 10 years ago, because I think that the game is not only has the game evolved, but technology has evolved to the point that I'm watching Torrey Pines on film. I'm seeing St. Ignatius. I'm going to try and travel to see them. You can see Lacoste Kane on live stream. So
Yeah.
it gets to the point where you can really watch a lot of the West Coast on film, but it's just not enough dollars in the sport to get out there. But you can't rank what you can't see. But I do think that a lot of these teams, as we mentioned, come east and make it easy. But to say there's probably a bias, which I believe in, against some of these teams that aren't able to come east, that's a fair assumption to make.
Yeah.
It's a pretty fair assumption to make that we can't see everybody out west, and there's a lot of talent out there. But it's more spread out. I mean, I think that you look at the individual rankings, the top 100, and you'll see a lot more, those names than you will the high schools, because the talent's just pretty spread out. And look at a team like West Coast Stars that's collecting talent from all over the West and even the South, and they're winning championships at the best events. But that's my thing. I think that we try and follow the West Coast and the Midwest and South as much as we can, and make it a point to watch and rely on some contacts to lean on them. But we know that we can't see everything all over. It's impossible. We're not there yet. Not even football can. But one day hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed the live streaming has helped because, I mean, I'm obviously located here in Chicago now, but I can still watch the MIAA games because
It's
of
great.
Booker and his crew, and then I watched there's a outlet out of Georgia. They play. I think the last couple of years they've broadcast the Lambert Centennial games. It's like I'm sitting on my computer at home in the evening just watching lacrosse, and it's 15 hours away from me.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful thing. I know that I'm always tied to Baltimore, but if I ever left, I would have the same luxury of all these resources, all that. But technology's made it easier. I think I know I have a ton of different crossover and huddle passwords from coaches, and just watch whatever we can, because that is one of the things that I will say is that sure, it is a lot of the same teams we're writing about and following and getting ranked, but there is a lot more talent. It's more spread out than I think ever before, but it's certainly exciting.
I'm going to ask you one more question we didn't have on the list, and I'm going to unleash Michael because I know he wants to talk Midwest.
Let's do it.
But because you made a good point, like because of travel and West Coast Stars, and a lot of those teams they come east and they come closer at all these tournaments. I'm thinking the Baltimore Summer Kickoff where there's so many teams and things like that. Has that helped get some of those teams noticed? Like when you see there's 3 guys on the West Coast Stars and they're all from St. Ignatius Prep and they're all on one of the best West Coast teams. Like this stuff like that helps. So you may not be able to see St. Ignatius Prep play, but you're like, well, I've seen a number of their players.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. I mean, I think the reason that I put the time and effort into this is because I put the time and effort into watching these players that I almost overthink it. Because at the end of the day, there's not a huge difference between the number one and number two team in the country, or even the 25 and 35. I think that you're really splitting hairs a lot of spots, but for sure, I think that watching the summer and fall definitely helps me. I have seen an All-St. Ignatius team, for example, which is great, or Mercer Island at NHSLS, or different examples from all over. But watching in the summer, I think definitely kind of gives me a sample size, a larger sample size, and seeing more talent that I think it gives us a better understanding of who we want to put where, but at the same time, you are watching a lot of the same teams over and over. So, and you're going to see a lot of gold helmets for Haverford, yellow helmets for Brunswick, the BL helmets, you're going to see so many of those because there's so much talent. But I think I need the summer to kind of give me an idea of who's where when it comes to some of these teams.
Yeah. Okay. I know Michael, like, he's a Midwesterner guy at heart, so I know he had some questions. I'd sent a couple of them to you, but I'll let Michael ask them since he's probably more articulate for it.
But yeah, well, you know what? The first thing I wanted to go back is when you were talking about like the West Coast Stars, who have kids from all over the place. I mean, they're Utah, Seattle, Denver. We have a team here. There's Juice Cherries out of Detroit. Resolute, they do it. Project Midwest, they have all the same thing. And we were, and I mentioned on your Twitter the other day when you were talking about don't wear your travel stuff on with your high school or that whole thing. And I think I made a comment. I said, what would be pretty cool? It would be if you're on your travel team to have the sticker of your high school to sort of represent, because to see West Coast Stars, I would love to see, when I'm out there watching them play, to say, oh, they got that kid from that school. I think that's just a whole separate issue. But I think that would be something that I would love to see be promoted. I mean, I think that would be very cool because you got 5 states on one team. That would give opportunities, I think, to see the explosion of this, how it's moving from east to west. So that just popped up in my head right there.
I think if anything you can possibly do to represent your high school, I think it's one of those things, and I wish I wasn't opening up this can of worms because I got a lot of heat for that. But in many ways, what I'm saying is I think that your high school should always come first. But to me, if you're playing club, nothing wrong with wearing your team's gloves. If you play with the Juice Cherries, rock Brother Ice, because the college coach sees that. He knows you played for a damn good program and been coached by some great coaches. You play against good talent and you know how to win. So I think that there is value in representing your high school, more than just pride. I think that it can help you because you'd be surprised at how many events I go to where a high school isn't even listed. It's just club and that's it.
And I think that's crazy.
I can't stand it. That's that's one of my biggest pet peeves. And, I do have a lot of pet peeves built up over the years about recruiting in high school, but that's one of them because your high school matters a lot, no matter where you're from, and you'll always have that group of friends and lean on those coaches to be your lifelong friends for a long time. Not saying club doesn't provide that, but some of the pride that goes into representing your high school has gone away in comparison to the way it was, a decade ago. But now I just sound like a big old curmudgeon, man. But I can continue. I think I went off on a tangent there, so I apologize.
No problem, because I do the same thing. So as far as the Midwest goes, I get text messages, emails, tweets, whatever, lamenting the fact that this team, that team, this team is not in the top 25. Mm-hmm. And I could see how that could happen. I know that you're not coming to the Midwest to watch these teams that can go out there, have a better opportunity. And I think one of the questions was about Loyola Academy from Illinois. They are going out there next week or 2 weeks. They're going to play Bullis, Georgetown Prep, and Calvert Hall back to back to back. And then 2 weeks later, they're going to play Chaminade, St. Anthony's, and Garden City. So they do that trip every year. They do usually between 4 and 6 games out east.
Yep.
Last year they went 5 and 6. They beat Victor on the road, and there was crickets, which is what actually got me started in this, because I heard it from people like, why aren't they getting any popularity? Why aren't they getting any credit? And I didn't know why. Honestly, I didn't know why. So I know Mike had asked you, what will it take a team like, now I'm not saying Loyola is the best team in the Midwest. There's, Brother Rice, there's DCC.
Example, I think, for what we're
right.
talking
But
yeah.
That's the one. So, because I think they're the only one that's going out east to take on that kind of a schedule. I mean, that's pretty brutal.
You can
That's a
also
brutal schedule.
track Culver. I think like
Right.
for this purpose, I think that Culver is an outlier, but Loyola Academy, I think that, as we said, they knew what they had. They have a pretty solid senior class. They have a hell of a defenseman. They have a great midfielder and attackman that can score. But I think it'll be interesting to see how they can compete, depth-wise. Can their backup stack up against these teams in DC? But to actually answer your question or get closer to doing so, I think that they have a good shot. I mean, it's tough to say, oh, they have to go this, 2-1 in their little DC trip, DC Maryland trip, or 1-2, 2-1 in Long Island. But I think that I look at quality losses. I know it's probably not realistic for a team like that to come out of it without a loss. I don't think Culver will even come east without a loss. There's too much talent elsewhere, and they're playing. I mean, the hardest part is playing these games in back-to-back days, and we do look at that, and we do, take that with a grain of salt, knowing that a team came all the way east. And they played, a team on the, say, 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, which I believe they are. I know they played Georgetown Prep at noon on the 22nd and played Calvert Hall on that Sunday. So it's very difficult to do. But I think if they came out above 500, that would make a pretty sizable statement about how good they are. I think I'd look at them if they came out of that above 500. I would definitely reward them in some sense.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think they're going to be missing 3 of their top players for that Baltimore trip. So as I talked to the coach yesterday, he said, well, this gives an opportunity to some of the kids who you don't know. They have a stud freshman that I think you watched on Inside, and you put on Inside Lacrosse, who's going to get a lot of playing time in this. And I said, well, that's a baptism by fire, but still, I mean, that's great, but because that's the team. Okay, so they come back from out east, they play the Midwest teams. Those teams play throughout the Midwest. That's what I try to tell people. I said, you gotta, and another thing, it doesn't really matter. I mean, so you're not ranked there. If your high school team wins the state championship,
yeah,
right, and you're still, you're as a parent, and your child is still going to play Division I, Division II, Division III. He's going to play college and ice. He's going to play lacrosse in college. I mean, that's the bonus. It's just, I think people from the Midwest especially have a very big chip on their shoulder when it comes to the East Coast. I mean, I know I got yelled at just by putting one team from Michigan above a team from Ohio, and my Twitter exploded, and I was called ridiculous. Actually, one person said I should stop reading Ty Xanders. That's what
that's all my haters to you.
Right. That's what they literally said. He's like, maybe if you stopped reading Ty Xanders and did your own homework. And I'd start cracking up. I'm like, what? I said, I could promise you, I know who your kids are here. I've seen it. I know your teams. But that's the chip. That's the thing that I try to explain to the people. So it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's just conversation.
I wish I could say it doesn't matter, I mean, because I feel that way, and I guess I am now, but it doesn't, I mean, again, I think that it's got to be cool to be able to look back and say, oh, we went 4-2 in our East Coast trip, or we beat a top 10 team, and we were ranked this because of that. I'm sure it's awesome to look back and pat yourself on the back and look at that memory and say, that was really cool that we were able to stack ourselves up against one of the best teams in the country, come out of it, victorious. So I understand that, but I think a lot of it is, I think no one should really need my approval or our approval, the media's approval. I think it's nice when you get it, and until you do, you will have that chip on your shoulder. But it is tough unless you're really playing the best teams. And like we said, not everyone can do that. I think that a school like MICDS, Loyola Academy, that has a strong endowment and is white collar. I think it's going to help. You have the budget to be able to, and the support from the administration to be able to go east and play the best teams. But it's tough. Not everyone can, and I think that there are going to be some teams that I can't see because they're not on live streams or they're not coming east, and that can be tough. And that's why I try and rely on people that are in the Midwest that are watching these teams play and say how good is this team really? What are the quality wins they have? Have they lost?
Yeah.
It is very difficult to measure some of those teams, and thank God some of these teams like down south at the King of Spring event all play each other. Because that's making Jeff Shannon's job very easy when we're ranking regional teams on Wednesday. It really, really helps when there are those mutual opponents.
That's what I was just going to say that's what Mike and I had talked about the other day about like Culver. I've had a big discussion about Culver. We don't need to rehash it. I just saw them today. I just got back from watching them play St. Xavier and Louisville. And then they played McAllen yesterday, and I saw them play last week. So I've seen them play 3 times. They're great to watch. But they will play all the teams in the Midwest that are most of the top teams. And then you can see how they stack up, the teams stack up. Now, some coaches don't like that whole stack up thing, but it's still, that's the part that I could tell people, like, well, they played Culver. That's the best shot you're getting. You got beat by 15, 20. They got beat by 5. That might be a difference, but that's one of the things that go here. So I do like the things like the King of Spring and the Midwest Lacrosse Challenge, the interstate competition, which I think will help. It's hard to do with athletic departments and rules and stuff like that, but those are the things that I think would help benefit you to look outside more to the Midwest, to the West. If there was like a big jamboree, I can go to that.
Yeah. No, you have to have it. I forget what team it is, but I looked at their schedule, a few days ago, and I said, that's not going to cut it. Why aren't you challenging yourself more? And this is a team that's been in the top 25. But just a really weak schedule. And, it's disappointing because it is a team that has the talent. But until you go out of state or welcome teams in that are from out of state to test your mettle, I think, what are you worth really? And I hate to say that, but it's the reality. It is the reality of where we are right now.
Big fish, small pond kind of syndrome. And I look at it, and from my perspective also, like, I don't know if every team really needs to go out of state, but if you play teams like, we'll just keep using Loyola Academy since we're picking on them, but they have a brutal East Coast schedule. But that doesn't mean New Trier necessarily needs to go out of state. Like, if they come home and they thump Loyola Academy by 15 and Loyola goes, 5-1 of their 6 games, that would be hard not to notice New Trier at that point, even though if they don't have to leave Illinois. I think it's one of those things, like when I was talking to Michael about this, it was like, I think the unfortunate thing, Loyola Academy, like, they go 3-3, they almost can't lose another game for the rest of the year if they want to crack the top 25. Seriously. They can't lose to South Elgin here in Illinois if they beat, Chaminade. Like,
one of them.
Yeah.
Right. Any of them.
It's kind of unfair, but it's just kind of the way it is.
It is. And I think, I'm hesitant. I think that, and maybe I'm creating a question that will come up later, but the public versus private conversation is one that has been fascinating. Going through the comments that people have, everyone wants to see the separate polls. But I think, to me, and you go back to an earlier point, public schools, I think, again, they can't schedule like these privates. Yeah. It's very difficult to do that. So, I guess the point I'm getting at is that there are a couple teams out there in certain areas. I want to see you test yourself against 3, 4, 5 teams in your area. That minimum. If you only have 2 games that you're really, really challenged, I'm skeptical. Yeah. I really am. That's just not enough of a measuring stick. A regular season, I think until
right.
we know that you're all going to be put up against each other when you get to the postseason. I look at a place like New Jersey where they have each other play, and New York where they have that bracket that really helps. But you have to have a handful of games that really challenge you, and if you don't, then you are on the outside looking in.
Yeah, New Jersey hands down is my favorite state for as far as their playoff period. Like they make it so easy because there's one team at the
group.
end.
Take that group. Boom.
It's the Highlander of them all. It's like there can be only one at the end of the year. All the state champions, there will be one that says they are the best in the state. It is. I wish every state adopted that sort of philosophy. Because I mean, you ever get it down in Maryland, like because the it's not like the MIAA, IAC, and public school champions ever play each other at that. Like maybe there's a situation they play at some point, but it's not like at the end of the year they all go into a bucket and battle it out. So
I hope we get there. I mean, I've talked to. I mean, most of my contacts are IAC and WCAC and MIAA. Locally. But I think they all have had discussions about maybe putting those private school league champions against each other at the end of the year. But it is one of those things that gets a little tricky with graduation exams, and we do internships senior year here. That makes it tough, but. I'd like it, again, anything that makes my job a little bit easier and, streamline a little bit. I know Geico was really close last year getting number 1 versus number 2 against each other. And that didn't end up happening because of a loss, but it does make it easier when these outside entities are putting together tournaments and just make it easier on people like myself and stacking these different leagues up against each other. But there are very few teams, leagues that do it. And I mean, there are places like the ISL and New England West that don't have a postseason tournament. And it's something we talk about. I think that you guys will actually really love the next issue of Inside Lacrosse. I won't give away too much, but for high school preview, we talked about sanctioning, and I did a feature on a top of the school program that I will not name, but we did a lot, regionally, talk about sanctioning tournaments, stuff like that I think will really clear things up for a lot of people. But, we are a long way away from the product being, the way we want it to be. But it's improving every year, and more teams are playing each other every year, and it's making the rankings a little bit easier. Although I say that now, in a few weeks, I'll be pulling my hair out on Tuesday night trying to make these decisions.
The MIAA will drive you nuts during the season, no doubt.
I know it's coming.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth pointing out that as much as obviously we love lacrosse, most of these state sanctioning rules, they're not thinking about lacrosse. Like a lot of this has to do with football, basketball, and the way some of those programs are run. Like they're thinking about those types of schools. They're not worried about Ward Melville's. Well, maybe New York is, but they're not worried about Texas isn't worried about St. Mark's lacrosse program and traveling. They're probably more thinking about like, all right, what are their football team? Like, what do we need to do as far as like not letting people run rampant with that, and then other sports just they get lumped into it. It's not like Florida kind of ran under that with I think it was Vero Beach girls was double secret, triple probation or something like that a few years ago because that was what I heard. Like it was one of those like they got a little too big for the state's liking, but it's this one. It's like it happens, but lacrosse it's not the biggest sport. It's not the money generator that some of the other sports are, so it doesn't get the attention that some of those other ones do.
No. It really is about other sports. I mean, that's why, and not to make this about the NCAA, but that's why I was so surprised when they took a lacrosse only rule and made a reality and pushed back recruiting because I didn't think they really cared about lacrosse, and I think some of these states really don't really have it in mind. And there are some areas where I don't blame them, but they are thinking about basketball and baseball and football. That is always going to be the case, at least in the next decade. Those sports will always come first, and the participation and the revenue streams and all that, I think will just be way higher. And we're not there yet, like I said.
Yeah, Paul Rabel is about another decade away from it filtering down to the high school level to become a money generator. He's obviously one of the sport's biggest ambassadors, but that stuff always trickles down. It's gotta it's got to make money in professional before it's ever going to trickle down to the rest of us.
Exactly.
So, all right, Ty. Well, I only have one other question. It's completely random, but I'm always curious whenever I talk to people because I know you've seen so many games. But what is the most memorable high school game that you've ever seen? And that's going to be a tough one because I know you've seen a lot of them.
It's tough enough picking a year, a year. To me, I think that the 2013 MIAA championship, was pretty cool. I mean, BL was one of the best teams ever, and they had that fantastic junior class. They had Colin Heacock, and guys like that. Mac Pons, was on that team. And Loyola, I think, was the number 5, number 6 seed and came in and stormed back to beat them after having a pretty strong, halftime deficit. That's a game that was pretty, memorable to me. Your jaw's in the ground, because it could have been the best team ever, in my mind. And, they went down. I mean, it's one of those things that was pretty incredible to watch. I mean, the power of a team that plays with a chip on their shoulder versus a team that already had championship T-shirts printed and all that. So that's one of the games that stands out to me in terms of the best games. But I've seen a lot. I mean, the first game that I ever covered for Inside Lacrosse, March 31st, 2009. My senior year, and my best friends in goal for St. Paul's. And, I don't say we anymore, but at the time we went down we lost Georgetown Prep with 0.1 seconds left in OT. And, and my best friend got scored on, and I got to interview Kevin Giblin afterwards. And I'll never forget that. That I got a lot to write about when the game ends less than a second left in overtime. So that stands out to me. I've seen a lot of good ones. Hill Culver last year was fantastic. The first edition was legendary, being up there in Detroit for that. I mean, I've seen a lot of good stuff. I've been very fortunate to travel a lot, meet some awesome people, watch some great games, and interview some great coaches and players. So I pinched myself. I've seen a lot of good lacrosse, and hope that doesn't stop anytime soon.
Yeah, that boys Latin game, I remember. I think it was one of those moments where I was like, "That can't be right." I kept looking at the scores, like, "That can't be right." I was like, were wired. They were number one all year. Like, they were number one going in. There was not another team that really was even the conversation for that entire season.
And it's crazy how often that happens. I mean, again, same year, 2009 that I was referencing. I remember that Gilman team, and then going back to previous year, I mean, Loyola lost to that Gilman team in 2008 that I think would have been, the best team that I'd seen to that point. They beat Loyola 17-7 and lost in the championship game, like a few weeks later. And everyone was saying 18-1, and then the next year it was something similar. I remember I missed it because I think I had a prom or something, but I remember following text messages. You had lax prior, didn't have Twitter at that point. This is not that long ago, and said Gilman lost to BL. I said, what? Are you kidding me? And just the parity and knowing that any given day in that league in particular, into other leagues, it's pretty special to follow it, and certainly gives me plenty to write about. So I know very hard to choose that make it easy for you, but I think that MIAA championship in 2013 was the most memorable, and Hill Culver was probably 2 in terms of the best games I've been to, but all are memorable for different reasons.
Yeah, that'll qualify. It's hard to pick with just one whenever you've been doing it for more than a decade. Like, there's never going to be just one.
I watched a lot, and very hard to pick, but a lot of good stuff out there, and I'm pumped for the season ahead and see some more.
All right, Ty. Well, I can't believe anybody wouldn't know where to find you online at this point, but I'll give you the opportunity to go ahead and promote whatever you want to promote.
Yeah, I'm simple. InsideLacrosse.com/recruiting, InsideLacrosse.com homepage. You have a ton of college stuff, but for my social media, it's simple. Just Ty Xanders for Instagram and Twitter. I have a rare name that starts with an X at the end, and no, my first name is not Tyler. So, people screw that up. But those are my handles, and thanks for having me on.
All right, Ty, thanks a lot, man. You have a good one.
Thanks so much, guys. You take care.
Thanks. Thank you.
Bye. So what'd you think, Mike?
I thought it was a very good interview. I thought he's very candid. He's very confident in his speaking. I thought it was great, actually.
Yeah.
And what I laugh about is when you asked him what his favorite game is.
Yeah.
I was going to ask him how much hate mail do you think he's going to get because he didn't name this game then or that game then.
No.
Someone will say, well, this was the best game. But he was very gracious with his time. I appreciate it. So when he's watching, I want to let him know that we really did appreciate it. It was nice.
Yeah. I was telling my wife, who has no idea who he is, but I was like, he's probably one of the bigger names in our sport, especially in the high school space. And I was like, I thought it was very gracious of him to come on and talk with us this week, especially considering, I know he gets a lot of hate when it comes, anybody who can see his Twitter stream sees that he gets a lot of hate. That was part of the reason I actually wanted to have him on, because like I've been on that side of the hate train and realized like, what is like, you put a lot of work and you really do your best, and it really is a thankless job to put together rankings of any sort, team rankings, player rankings, and it's not an exact science. Like I know he's had teams, I've had teams that you're ranked number one. I mean, that boys Latin team that he mentioned is like, there was nobody in the country that didn't think they were the number one team in the nation that year. They were number one everywhere. And it was even at the point, like I remember asking my boss when I was at ESPN, I was like, boys Latin finished 19-1 and they lost their championship game. They lost their final game of the year. I was like, but they probably still are by far the best team in the nation. I was like, can I leave them at number one? And he was like, no. He was like, because at the end of the day, you're going to have the team that lost the championship to another team as the number one team. Like it's hard to rationalize, because you're looking at this and you're like, but I know they're the best team. If they had lost that game 3 weeks ago, they would end number one, but they lost the title game. And it was such a hard dilemma. And I remember talking about games, like I saw Haverford School, I think it was 2011, and they were wire to wire. I think they were 25-0 at that point, and I went to see them play Malvern Prep in their last game of the year at Cabrini College, and that place was rocking. It is still it is my most memorable game, because that place was just rocking. And I think Haverford was down 2 goals with like 2 minutes to go. And of course, I'm putting my reporter hat on because I'd gone to be part of the celebration and be like, I'm gonna crown, like tell them they're number one after this game, and they're down by 2 with less than 2 minutes to go, and I'm just sitting there. I'm like, what am I gonna do tomorrow? I'm like, it's like this team is by far the best in the nation, but they're getting ready to lose. I was like, oh my god! I was like, my next few days, I was like, I'm never gonna get any sleep. Luckily, they ended up pulling it out and scored like 3 goals in those last 2 minutes to win it. It was a phenomenal end to a game, but it's one of those like, it's hard to enjoy games when you're doing that. Like when Ty, as much as he loves lacrosse, when he's looking at, boys Latin and Calvert Hall, and you have Calvert Hall at 4 and boys Latin at 15, there's part of you, it's like, let's let Calvert Hall win because it's going to make my Tuesday afternoon a lot easier. It's like, so I don't have to sit there and try to figure out, all this spider's web of team rankings and stuff like that. It's tough. And so I thought, like, for me to have him on and kind of hopefully let people get a little peek behind the curtain of what this world is like, because I think it's easy to sit there and be like, oh, this team shouldn't be ranked, but it's like there's work that goes into it, and we're not going to convince anybody that doesn't want to be convinced. But there's probably people out there like, oh, maybe I didn't realize it took that work. Like he's not starting this 2 weeks ago. For him, this starts sometime over the summer, like after the season's end and recruiting starts it up. Like that, this a lot of the stuff, you're making these notes that early, like, all right, I got to keep an eye on this team, and this team. So I was very thankful that he came on to talk with us. But I'd be interested in what you think, being from the Midwest. Like, did it shine anything that maybe you weren't aware of?
No, I knew that the Midwest will always be behind because there's not going to be any eyes on it. As you noticed, when he was talking right over the Midwest. He was like, oh, these teams out West, because I could watch him. And I'm thinking, well, you're skipping over the whole Midwest again. But I think that's going to change. And when he's right, when he's like if we're going to talk a Midwest blue blood program, like a Loyola, I put Brother Rice, I put, 4 teams from Ohio, the
right.
Mollers, St. X, St. Ignatius, if they could all have the opportunity to go out east and play some of the top teams, then come back, especially go out there and beat some,
Yeah.
and maybe put a beating on, because I know the chip on the shoulder will be big heading out there,
Right.
where these teams from the Midwest might get overlooked by some of these teams out east. And then you come back what we've said, and it's almost like you pollinate the Midwest, saying, "Oh, this team beat this team," but then this team who doesn't have the opportunity to go out east beats them. Like New Trier. Like I said, New Trier is the guinea pig this year. New Trier plays St. Xavier, Brother Rice, DCC. That's as far as the Midwest goes. I mean, you're missing maybe a couple, and they play Loyola. Mm-hmm. They've got. I mean, St. X is in the St. X in Kentucky. They're still a top team. I just watched them today. They're a great team. I mean, they played Culver. It was a little rough. But,
watching anybody play Culver is
right.
And
Culver
realize.
Culver came out strong. I think they were a little sloppy last night, so I think they got a little talking to today. It's hard when you can't win a face-off. Let's put it that way. And then, not to mention, to start playing a team like that, you're already losing almost when you start, because the nerves. And again, these are still high school kids. These are still kids who are 15, 16, 17. And all they've been hearing and seeing on all these things is Culver's the best team. So that's the thing. But for now, when the season starts, to see the Loyola go out for those 6 games, they will be playing New Trier when they come back. New Trier will be playing St. X, DCC, Brother Rice. And then you'll have St. X playing Moeller playing St. Ignatius, St. Ignatius playing Cathedral here. So you get that cross-pollination. And all I think is the more they can get out east to bring it back, that's what it probably will take. That's what it'll probably take to have a person like Ty Xander take a better look. If Loyola went out in 2 weeks and just put a thumping on whoever they played, I think he'd take notice and say, how good is this team? I mean, he obviously knew about their team. He knows about their players.
Right.
And I know he knows about all the top players in the Midwest, because that's the most important part, where he knows those
part
players.
of what he does.
Right. And there's no lack of top talent here.
Yeah.
It's just not top talent on one team.
Right.
Each team doesn't have 5, 6, 7, 8 players. Well, some do, but and it depends on the year. It's not every year like it is out there. So I know that's what would take to change his mind. But that's what's going to happen. I think that's the model, or the big type of tournaments like the King of Spring.
Yeah.
If there was a big thing in the Midwest to happen where it would be in his, I mean, let's talk about the money. Okay.
Right.
If he's spending it out of his pocket, or if if he has a stipend from Inside Lacrosse, well, is it worth it to fly here for one game?
Right.
Probably not. But if it was like a 6-team, 7-team of the top teams in the Midwest, that's probably something he'd come out to report on.
Yeah. Well, even Inside Lacrosse, they're still going to have a travel budget. And so you're going to look at, because I mean, I did, when I was at ESPN, when I was trying to be like, oh, I want to go to these games, it was always like, why? And you had to justify it. Most of it was like, well, I get to see my number 1, my number 10, my number 15, the best team out of Ohio. You had to rationalize, be like, all right, we're going to give you, basically like $1,000 to fly and rent a car and stay in a hotel for 3 or 4 nights. You think ESPN, it's like, they're still a massive, they're owned by Disney. They got more money than God.
Right.
So you don't think that there's a limit, but there's a limit. There's a budget. So you really have to, it really does take big events, to kind of make it worth your while. Cause to be honest, just, it's hard traveling sometimes too. It's like, cause it's during the season, so we all have our routines. I do this on Saturday and Sunday and Monday, and I put together my rankings on Monday for release on Tuesday. And then when you go on the road, it throws all that off. And so it's like you're suddenly, you're sitting at a hotel business center, you're sitting on the bed at the hotel with a game on the TV, trying to do all the stuff that you would normally have done hours ago, but you've been sitting at games for all afternoon. So it's stressful, during the season. So, I think there's all that to look into. So it's you really, when you look at different games, Ty's not going to come out to the Loyola New Trier game. It's just not worth the expense and his time and effort to kind of come out for one game. Now, if it was, New Trier, Loyola Academy, Brother Rice, Archbishop Moeller, we'll just throw both St. Xavier since we're putting together a dream team tournament. But it's like, MICDS, like you put those teams in a tournament, and be like, all right, we're going to put them together. I think that's when you start to look at it and be like, all right, that's a little bit, I can give up some sleep and maybe a few brain cells to get out there and, push my work back. But it's like, I think there's different, and obviously we didn't ask him about that part of it, but, I've been in that position where, I've traveled out, 4 or 5 hours up north to go see a game. And, you pay the price a little bit when you're doing that. Your boss, you have bosses. They're still expecting to be like, the rankings come out Tuesday at noon, no matter what, because it's the biggest traffic driver. So you have no excuse not to do that stuff. So it's like, there's always that push and pull with a lot of that stuff as well. So it's fun, but it's like always amazing. Like I was talking with someone the other day, and he was commenting like this is the first time in 20 years that because he's retired, it was the first time in 20 years that he was like, I actually got to watch a lacrosse game. He's like, you spend so much time covering it and writing about it and doing all this other stuff. It's like you realize you don't get to watch a college lacrosse game very often because you're working. The game you love is not, it's not the same for us as it may be for someone who's just watching it because they love it. Like they have the time, they go off and like that's their hobby. For a lot of us, it's what we do. It's like, so it's a different perspective as well.
Right. Well, my hobby is now my work, let's say. I mean,
yeah.
but I love that. You see, I'm lucky. Okay. Yeah. I'm lucky that I could do this. Like just getting in a car this morning, woke up, drove to Louisville.
Yeah.
Drove to Detroit the other day. I mean, people think I'm crazy. They're like, you just got up and drove 4 hours to watch a lacrosse game for an hour and a half and then drove back 4 hours. I'm like, yeah. They're like, well, that's nuts. I'm like, is it? I'm like, is it better than doing something? It's something I enjoy. It's something that I think I can help promote it. I think I can, it'll help kids. It'll help coaches. So I feel like there's a value to it and I enjoy it. I mean, I mean, I know the gas will end up costing, I have a gas guzzler of a car, but I still just drive. I had a smile on my face driving back the whole way today, knowing I was going to do this, knowing I just watched a good game, knowing that, just seeing some of the talent out there on both teams, and saying, this is something I'd love to talk about. And now the week is starting. Indiana starts this week.
Yeah.
So it's going. This is it. It's first game Wednesday for my kid, first game for all the other teams where it's legit. I'm ready. And that's the luck I have. That's why when people say they're blessed, I'm blessed to be able to do something which someone might not even care, but people think lacrosse, what are you, crazy? It's something I enjoy. It's something I enjoy, and it's something I can try to help contribute to someone like you who's made this into something bigger.
Yeah.
So that's what I like.
And obviously I love doing this because I literally do it for free. And it's what it's like. I've been doing it like Lax Records. It was hard for me to believe the other day. I think technically it'll turn 5 in June, but it'll be its 5th year since I started this site literally on a whim as something to do because I had just got laid off from my job. And I was like, I want to do something with this stuff. Let's see what happens. And that it's funny to think about. It's like, but it's been 5 years, and I've been fortunate to be able to I've met a lot of people just because of this sport and this site and what I do, and it's fantastic. I think to bring it kind of back around, a lot of the rankings and a lot of the obviously conversation we had, it brings conversation to players and teams in areas that really might not have otherwise received it. Like my point still stands. Like I don't know how many people it would talk about St. Ignatius Prep out of California, or even to your point, like Loyola Academy went out and beat Victor last year, that won a state championship, but no one really back here was talking about it. So it just, obviously you were and I was, but that's not a lot of people talking about it in the grand scheme of things. Like, I'm sure, if it had been football, more people would have talked about it at that kind of level. So it's like, but it's nice to know that there's people out there that are, love the sport enough to really bang the drum, and some of us bang the drum very loudly for the passion that we have for the sport, and that's kind of what it takes.
Absolutely. Totally with you. That's great.
All right. Well, Michael, we'll wrap it up again for this week. So why don't you tell everybody where they can find you online?
You can email me at mward@laxrecords.com. And on Twitter, I'm MFWCHI.
And you can find me at Lax Records on Twitter and Instagram, and of course, laxrecords.com. Everybody?
And well, what about the YouTube now? We have a YouTube channel. Is that?
Yes, we are on YouTube, so we release. Thank you for asking. We do the podcast that you're watching now or listening to now. If you didn't know, we do it. We release that on Sunday at the same time, and then I do a weekly highlight show every Monday, and I've been doing a Throwback Thursday every Thursday because I have a cornucopia of old interviews with players. Some of them you may know and look very different from when they did when I interviewed them. Some of them 10 years ago, which is scary to think about. But yeah, unfortunately, you have to get to 100 subscribers before YouTube will let you have a real fancy URL of youtube.com/laxrecords. So right now it's just a bunch of gobbledygook. So if we get to 100 subscribers, we can say youtube.com/laxrecords, but we're not there yet. So.
Okay, well then that'll be my goal this week is to get 100 subscribers.
There we go.
I'll keep pushing it.
We're at 43, so we need 57 more people before YouTube will let us rename it so we can get something, make it a little bit more clean for everybody to find it. So, so at Lax Records on Twitter and Instagram, find us on YouTube. You can search for Lax Records, and of course, laxrecords.com. Everybody, have a week.
All right, see ya.